She was just 10 when her mother disappeared, 12 when she started sleeping in shelters, 14 when she was diagnosed with a learning disability, and told she'd probably never finish high school. No permanent address, no stable caregiver, no one to advocate for her needs. By 16, she was failing classes, not because she didn't try, but because reading black text on a whiteboard felt like decoding a puzzle underwater. She'd stare at the letters until they blurred, raise her hand, only to get silenced by sighs. Too slow, too distracted, too much trouble. She was alone, invisible, a statistic in the making, but something inside her refused to disappear. She started reading books under street lamps, borrowed colored plastic sheets from the library to help the words stop jumping, watched lectures at the public computer lab on an old donated tablet with a cracked screen. She wasn't preparing for college, she was trying to survive, and yet, years later, that same girl walked through the gates of Harvard, not as a visitor, not as a miracle, but as a scholar, and as a voice for every child who had ever been told, "You don't belong." The world sees Harvard as a symbol of excellence, but what does it take to carry trauma, disability, and poverty and still walk proudly through its doors? How does a girl with dyslexia, no home, and no support system rise into a national voice for justice, equity, and visibility? This isn't a story of sudden success. It's a story of quiet defiance, of nights no one saw, of pages whispered aloud under flickering streetlights, of systems built to overlook her, and how she found a way to rise anyway. But just when it seems like she's made it, you'll discover that her greatest impact was still ahead of her. Stay with us. Because this story doesn't just inspire, it invites you to ask yourself, what if your voice could be the one someone else is waiting for? Her name is Amira Cole, born in a forgotten zip code where city buses barely ran, where sirens sang louder than lullabies, and school supplies were handed out like charity only if you asked loud enough. Her mother, brilliant but battling addiction, was there and then she wasn't. Sometimes it was a few days, sometimes weeks. Sometimes Amira didn't ask. Her father was a name she saw once on a court document. No return address, no second chances. Amira's earliest memories weren't bedtime stories. They were eviction notices taped to the front door, cereal for dinner, waking up on different couches, wondering if this was her real home now. By age 8, she could pack a bag in under 2 minutes. By 9, she knew which bus route stayed open past midnight. And by 10, she'd already learned that asking for help came with looks. Pitying, suspicious, or worse, indifferent. She bounced between schools like a pinball, 5 in 3 years. Each new teacher handed her a test. Each one marked her as behind. But no one ever asked why. No one noticed that letters shimmered and pulsed on the page. That fluorescent lights gave her headaches. That reading a single paragraph felt like swimming through static. They called her distracted, lazy, a disruption. She kept her head down, copied from others, laughed off the pain. But inside, she felt like the world was moving ahead without her, and no one had even asked if she wanted to come along. Her safe place was a library, 2 bus rides away, no judgment, just books, just quiet, just her. It was there she first met Ms. Lopez, a volunteer who ran after-school reading sessions. Ms. Lopez noticed something no one else had. That Amira tilted her head to read, that she blinked rapidly while writing, that she memorized rather than comprehended. "I think you're seeing the world differently," she said one day, placing a translucent blue overlay across a worksheet. And for the first time, the letters stopped dancing. An evaluation followed: Erland syndrome, dyslexia, sensory processing issues. It wasn't a relief, not yet, because labels didn't erase the years she'd already spent blaming herself. Now she had a diagnosis, but not a plan. The school gave her an IEP, separate classes, lower expectations, simplified materials. And once again, Amira was told what she couldn't do, instead of asked what she wanted to try. Then came the final blow. Her mother left, this time for good. No call, no note, just an empty room and an eviction slip. Foster care was full, relatives unavailable, so Amira did what she always did: survived. She found a youth shelter that had space, kept her grades just high enough to avoid suspension, told no one what she was going through because no one ever asked. She washed her school uniform in the shelter's sink, tucked her textbooks under her mattress so they wouldn't get stolen, charged her tablet during lunch, and when everything else felt unstable, she walked to that library every single day, not to get ahead, just to not fall further behind. And even then, something inside her still burned, a question that refused to go away. What if I'm not broken? What if the system just wasn't built for someone like me? That question lived in her bones. And the answer would come not in a single moment, but in every step she dared to take forward, even when the ground felt like it might give way beneath her. The change didn't start with a breakthrough. It started with a door. A library door, chipped paint, sticky handle, but always open. 15-year-old Amira had started visiting it every afternoon, not for warmth, not for Wi-Fi, but for something rarer, a place where no one looked at her like she didn't belong. One afternoon, in a back corner near the radiator, she found a crate marked discarded. Inside were outdated SAT prep books, half-torn GED manuals, and notebooks with scribbles from someone else's dreams. She didn't believe college was for her, didn't even believe high school graduation was guaranteed. But something about that crate, those abandoned pages, made her pause. She pulled out a book, sat down, and started to read. It took 10 minutes to get through a paragraph. Letters slid off the page like oil. Her eyes stung from the overhead light. But she remembered something Miss Lopez once said: "When the world doesn't make space for you, make your own margins." She reached into her bag, pulled out the translucent blue overlay she carried everywhere now, laid it across the page, and tried again. The words stopped swimming. The sentences stood still. It was slow, but it was hers. That night, she stayed until the lights flickered off. She didn't check her phone. She didn't check the clock. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she was absorbed. Something shifted. She wasn't just reading. She was reclaiming. And that night, riding the late bus back to the shelter, she made a promise to herself: I will not vanish. I will not give up on my mind, even if the world did. From that day forward, the library became her second home. She used the public computer to find TED Talks on dyslexia, watched community college lectures on YouTube, listened to podcasts about neurodivergent learners and low-income students who made it, downloaded free apps with text-to-speech features and voice memo note-taken. She rewrote biology notes in rhyme, turned historical dates into melodies. She wasn't studying harder. She was studying differently. And when a youth outreach nonprofit ran a workshop at the shelter, inviting teens to write essays about their lives, she signed up, half out of curiosity, half out of defiance. The prompt was, "What does resilience look like to you?" Amira didn't sugarcoat her story. She wrote about the shame of being the poor kid, about hiding her overlays, about pretending she understood assignments when she was actually sounding out words phonetically in her head. But she also wrote about what it felt like to read her first full chapter alone, to solve a math problem using her own invented steps, to realize her brain wasn't broken, just misunderstood. She didn't win, but the essay found its way into the hands of someone who needed to read it, a principal from a different district who shared it with a youth journalist, who passed it to an admissions officer at a summer bridge program for students facing systemic barriers. That essay, raw, vulnerable, unedited, earned her a seat at the table. Not because she was exceptional, but because someone finally saw that she was trying in a world that wasn't trying for her. They sent her an invitation, paid for her transportation, gave her a used Chromebook and a mentor named Mr. Kwan. He asked her on the first day, "What do you want to build with your life?" She said, "I don't know yet, but I know I want to help people like me. People who are told to shrink their dreams before they even speak them." And that answer, that hunger, was the spark that would set her entire path ablaze. Because Amira didn't just cross a threshold that summer, she tore it down behind her so others could follow. The summer bridge program was only 8 weeks long, but for Amira, it felt like stepping onto a different planet. For the first time, she didn't have to explain why she used overlays, or why she spoke her essays instead of typing them, or why a cafeteria full of noise made her hands tremble. Her differences weren't just tolerated, they were understood. Her mentor, Mr. Kwan, saw it immediately. She wasn't behind, she was untranslated, so he helped her decode the system. How college applications worked, what scholarships were really looking for, how to write an essay that didn't just impress, but revealed. Amira didn't have perfect grammar. She didn't have extracurriculars, AP classes, or a resume filled with enrichment programs. What she had was a story and a voice that had never been heard, but couldn't be ignored. She started writing late at night in the computer lab, not just essays, but blog posts, letters to editors, journal entries to herself. She wrote about what it felt like to be called slow, about being hungry during finals week, about the pain of knowing that the only reason you're resilient is because you had no other choice. And when the program ended, she walked away with more than test scores or certificates. She walked away with proof. Proof that her mind could navigate rigor, that her learning style wasn't a flaw. It was a different form of power. Back home, she dove into the application process. She applied to local schools, regional programs, and then Harvard. Not because she expected to get in, but because she wanted someone in that admissions office to read her words and remember her name. The personal statement she submitted wasn't polished, but it was honest. "I am not your typical applicant. I didn't lead clubs or win science fairs. I led myself out of systems that never expected me to survive. I didn't start on the honor roll. I started in a shelter. I started with a diagnosis no one explained. I started invisible, but I'm not invisible anymore." She clicked submit and let it go. Weeks passed, then months, then a thick envelope. She opened it in the community center kitchen, surrounded by the staff who'd fed her, tutors who had stayed late for her, and younger students who looked up to her. It said, "Welcome to the class of 2029. She didn't cry, not yet. She just sat down, hugged the envelope to her chest, and whispered, "They see me." But Harvard wasn't the ending. It was the beginning. Because once she arrived, Amira discovered the real work wasn't just learning, it was unlearning the shame she had carried for years. To the outside world, Amira had made it. Harvard student, campus speaker, policy advocate, a symbol of what was possible. But beneath the applause, beneath the headlines, was a young woman still learning how to breathe. Because success for someone like Amira didn't come with relief. It came with weight. Every time she walked into a lecture hall, she wondered if someone would think she didn't belong. Every time she needed extended test time, she braced herself for the looks, the whispers, the professors who barely hid their irritation. Even at Harvard, especially at Harvard, she was reminded how deeply systems resist difference. There were moments when the tech failed. Her screen reader would glitch mid-exam. Her assistive note-taking software would crash, leaving her scrambling to reconstruct hours of discussion from memory. There were nights she'd sit on her dorm floor, papers scattered like fallen leaves, and ask herself, how much do I have to prove just to be seen? And still, she kept going, but not without cost. She began having panic attacks, small at first, a racing heartbeat, tightness in her chest during office hours, eventually full spirals that left her curled up in a bathroom stall, counting tiles to stay grounded. She didn't tell anyone at first, not because she was ashamed, but because she'd learned to survive in silence. Until one night, after speaking at an event on educational equity, she went back to her room, closed the door, and broke down. Tears, trembling, a voice inside whispering, "You're still that girl sleeping on the bus. They just haven't figured it out yet." That night, for the first time in years, she called Ms. Lopez. They didn't talk about Harvard, or awards, or scholarships. They talked about fear, about exhaustion, about what it feels like to always carry the burden of being the exception. And slowly, Amira began to realize strength wasn't just showing up, it was letting herself be human. So she started therapy, joined a mental health peer group on campus, spoke openly about burnout and imposter syndrome, even when it scared her. She told students, "You don't have to be strong all the time to be worthy of success. You don't have to break to deserve a break." She started posting unfiltered journal entries online, messy thoughts, unanswered questions, realness, and something surprising happened. People responded, not just students, but teachers, parents, other survivors of invisible battles. They didn't thank her for being inspirational. They thanked her for being honest. Because Amira wasn't bulletproof, she never wanted to be. She was tired of stories that painted her as a miracle. She wanted people to understand that she had tripped, fallen, curled up in despair, and still returned. Her strength was in her transparency, not her perfection. She once stood in front of an auditorium full of donors and said, "I don't want your admiration, I want your action. Your investment in students who are still sleeping in shelters. Your willingness to listen to kids who don't raise their hands because they've been told they're wrong too many times." There was a silence in the room, not of discomfort, but of awakening. Amira had stopped trying to fit the mold. Now she was remaking it. She hired students who were undocumented, disabled, and overlooked to work on her policy projects. She pushed for housing reform in cities she once escaped from. She founded a nonprofit called First Light, dedicated to helping youth navigate school with learning differences, trauma histories, and nowhere safe to go after class. Because Amira's greatest strength wasn't that she made it out, it was that she refused to close the door behind her. Amira never set out to inspire. She never wanted a spotlight. She wanted a desk that didn't wobble, a teacher who called on her without hesitation, a page that didn't fight her every time she tried to read it. She just wanted to matter, to be seen, not as a miracle, not as a burden, but as a mind worth investing in. She once said, "People talk about rising above poverty like it's a ladder, but it's not. It's a rope you pull through fog, with your teeth if you have to. And the higher you climb, the more you see how many others were left below." In losing her stability, in losing her mother, in losing time to diagnoses that came too late, Amira didn't lose herself. She found her voice. She found that advocacy doesn't begin at podiums. It begins in whispers, in unanswered emails, in showing up again after you've been told you don't belong. She found that intelligence has nothing to do with fluency or speed. That power doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears hand-me-down jeans and carries a food stamp card. And she discovered something no classroom had ever taught her. That dignity isn't earned by performing strength. It's affirmed by living truthfully. She wasn't just a student. She was a survivor of a system that assumed her silence meant she had nothing to say. But Amira rewrote that silence into syllables, into speeches, into space, for others. "I used to think I was broken," she said one evening during a campus vigil. "Now I know I was just waiting for the world to meet me where I already was." She didn't escape her story, she stood in it. She planted something there and made it grow. If Amira's story stirred something in you, a memory you buried, a question you've been afraid to ask, a quiet fire that still flickers despite the weight of the world, don't let it go dim. Comment below. What part of her journey felt familiar to you? What challenge once made you feel invisible? And how did you begin to rise? You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to speak the truth you carry. Share this video with someone who's still in their chapter 1, someone sitting in a classroom where they don't feel seen, someone who believes their diagnosis is a wall, not a doorway, someone who doesn't know yet that there's a version of themselves still waiting to be discovered. Subscribe to Able in every way, because here we believe that stories like Amira's are not rare. They're just rarely heard. For every Amira who makes it to Harvard, there are thousands more still reading under street lamps, still memorizing bus schedules instead of vocabulary lists, still wondering if they're worth the effort. And maybe, just maybe, the story they need to hear next is yours. You don't need perfect sight to see your future. You don't need perfect words to speak your truth. You don't need to be ready to begin. You're not behind, Amira said. You're becoming. So let this story be a reminder. Real vision isn't what's ahead. It's what lives inside you. And sometimes the loudest voice in the room comes from someone the world once tried to silence.